Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've all heard the phrase failure to launch when discussing children and parents. You know, that the prototypical model we think of is that you grow up in the home of your parents, and then when you hit a certain age, you move out and move on to your own life and perhaps have your own family and have your own kids who someday will grow up and move out. And so if an adult doesn't move out and it looks like they have no plans to move out, or they can't move out for whatever reason, they often refer to that as a failure to launch. And occasionally, we hear about things that happen. An entire movie's been made about it, a comedy called Failure to Launch, I believe. And I've also known people who said, oh, by the way, you know, this person's still living at home with their parents, and it's decades later. So here we go. Parasites. Parasites is what a mother has called her kids. She's won a court case to evict her sons who are in their 40s. Now, this is out of Italy. Which somehow makes it interesting because there's always this, and I realize it's a cliche, but there's this cliche about how Italian families are. And I've known a lot of Italian guys who have very, very fond feelings towards their mothers, especially the ones who cook well. And here we have a mother calling her kids parasites because they wouldn't move out. So she had to go to court to evict them. Never good. Barbara Latza Nato wrote this for CNN. She says, mother's love does have limits, apparently. A 75-year-old woman in the northern Italian city of Pavia won a court order recently after she filed a lawsuit against her two sons aged 40 and 42. And that judgment got them removed from her house, according to the court clerk that CNN spoke to, asking about this. The sons were described in court papers by their mother as parasites. She actually called them parasites. They've been living in the family apartment without contributing financially or helping around the house, according to the complaint filed by her. She was not named, but this was filed in a tribunal district court. Both men are employed, according to the court documents. So she is 75 years old. She's got the two kids, 40, 42. They both have jobs. They live at home in the apartment with her. She's like, guys, get your own place. She may have said that in Italian. And they're like, no, we like it here. Well, the reason they like it there is, one, they're comfortable. Two, they don't pay rent. So a judge sided with the mother. And by the way, she is separated from the men's father. And her pension went entirely to food and maintenance, and ruled that the two big babies have until December 18th to vacate the premises, according to the court ruling. Now, here's the question. Somebody referred to them as two big babies in Italian. We don't know if that's the judge speaking or if that's what the mother called them. But the judge wrote, there is no provision in the legislation which attributes to the adult child the unconditional right to remain in the home exclusively owned by the parents against their will and by virtue of the family bond alone. So what happens, as you can imagine, adults overstay their welcome with their parents. Parents usually start getting more agitated, and eventually somebody moves out. However, here they didn't. And I guess they're thinking, hey, mom's never going to get that freaky about it in terms of screaming and yelling and causing trouble. But she went to court. And you know that when you go to court, you're going to lose this if you're the kid. What legal right do you have to insist on staying in your parents' home after you've achieved adulthood, especially when you're 42 years old? Okay, 42 years old. So the men did hire lawyers and fought the eviction, according to the local newspaper. And they argued that Italian parents are required by law to take care of their children as long as necessary. And again, anytime you make the argument, I don't care if it's in Italy or America or Quebec, anytime you're making an argument in court and you say, well, it's the law, the judge is going to do that thing that I do and say, oh, it's the law, show it to me. And you can't pull the old, hey, you're the judge, you show us. No. The judge will look at your attorney and say, attorney, show me that law. Show me the law. Is it on the books, the blue books behind Mr. Lehto over there in the USA? Is it in the books, the Italian equivalents? Is it? If it's not, then stop saying these things are somehow in the law. So there's no provision in the legislation which attributes to the adult child the unconditional right to remain in the home exclusively owned by the parents against their will and by virtue of the family bond alone. Now, by virtue of the family bond alone, he's suggesting there could be ways that there might be a right to stay. So, for instance, let's suppose, and I'm making stuff up here just to prove a point, let's suppose the kids went to their mom one day and said, hey, Mom, we want to stay here a little bit longer. We know that you think we're parasites and big babies, but we're willing to pay you rent. If she said, okay, and she calls up her lawyer and says, draft up a lease for these people, these kids of mine, these parasites. And so they draw up a lease that says they have the right to stay there for 24 months for so much per month, as long as they make that payment. Halfway through that, if she comes in and goes, guys, I'm sick, you get out of here. No, we got a lease. So there can be something, it just can't be the family bond by itself. So the men hired lawyers, according to the local newspaper, and they argued that parents are required by law to take care of their children as long as necessary. And you got to point out and ask, why is it necessary for a 42-year-old man who has a job to be taken care of by his mother? So the judge cited the existing law in the ruling and agreed that the stay in the property could initially be considered well-founded because the law is based on the maintenance obligation incumbent on the parent. But it no longer appears justifiable considering the two defendants are subjects over 40, and once a certain age has been exceeded, the child can no longer expect the parents to continue the maintenance obligation beyond limits that are no longer reasonable. So the judge is suggesting that let's suppose that you, went to college and got a bachelor's degree and you're at home because you can't find a job at 23. And your mom comes along and goes, parasite, get out. Gee, Mom, I wish you hadn't named me that. The court's saying it's possible that there might be an obligation to make sure the person can launch on their own, but didn't go so far as to say where that line is, and that's important. So a lawyer for the men told local media that they're considering an appeal. Now, I may have said earlier mistakenly that these guys are out. I don't know if they're actually out physically. Presumably they got to move stuff out and so on. But if they're going to appeal this, quite often you can leave things status quo, not the British rock band, but leave things as they are. We're in the Army now. And great song. And you leave things as a status quo until the appeals are heard. Okay? So I don't know if they are going to appeal. They might be able to buy themselves some more time with that. That's a concern. This is not the first time, though, by the way, that big babies, an Italian term used to describe adult men who are too dependent on their mothers, has cropped up in the legal system in Italy. In 2020, Italy's Supreme Court ruled against a 35-year-old man who worked as a part-time music teacher who expected financial support from his parents after he argued that he could not support himself on an annual salary of $21,000 a year. And by the way, some people might go, yeah, obviously you can't support yourself at $21,000 a year. But that's not the fault of your parents. That's the fault of the job you have. So I know people who look at a job and go, if I did that job, I couldn't survive. Okay, then is that your parents' fault? Or is that the problem with that job you've chosen? On average, and this is interesting, on average, Italians leave their parental home at the average age of 30, according to data from Eurostat. Croatia has the highest age in the European Union with an average age of 33 years old of launching, 33 years old. By contrast, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark start life on their own at the average age of 21. So Finns are doing it right, as are the Swedes and the Danes. I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing. I have no idea. It's probably a function of all kinds of stuff, including cost of living and so on. But Finland, Sweden, and Denmark at 21. Croatians averaging at 33 years old. Here we've got guys 40 and 42. The mom in pleadings called them parasites, but she did win the case and got them evicted. So crazy story, failure to launch. And we've all seen this before. And I've seen it before. The parents didn't care. I've seen where the parents are like, no, don't mind having the people around the house. And once they move out, we'd be lonely. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But when the mom is sitting there, guys, get out. Get out. I'm going to hire a lawyer. Well, at that point, you got to get out. So Barbie Latza Nato wrote that. Alan sent it. Thanks a lot. Parasites. The mother calls them as she wins the court case to evict her two sons in their 40s in Italy. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Some will win, some will lose. Some are born to sing the blues.